Chapter 18 of The Missing Manatee. It was a day for surprises, that was for sure. I got another one that afternoon, when I told Meemaw that Blink had shot the manatee. She listened and didn't even yell at me for not going to Lenny's, as I told her I was doing. When she'd heard the whole story, she smiled real big and nodded as if it was exactly what she'd expected to hear. "I had a feeling there was something more to it, Skeeter," she said. "I couldn't get my mind around the idea that Dan would kill a manatee in cold blood. It didn't feel right somehow. He may look tough with that nasty old scar and all, but he's a squishy old marshmallow inside." "Meemaw," I said, "speaking of that scar, did Dan ever tell you the whole story of how he got it?" She laughed. "Shoot, Skeeter, he didn't have to tell me. I was there." I was about to pour myself a glass of milk, and when I heard that, I nearly dropped the carton. "You were there?" I held the milk carton suspended, my jaw probably hanging halfway to the floor. Meemaw laughed again and patted her hair. "What happened, Meemaw? Tell me." "Oh, darling, it was a long time ago." "But you remember, right?" I asked. "Like it was yesterday," she answered. I nodded to urge her along. Oh my, we were young, Dan and I. Your Meemaw wasn't always an old lady, believe it or not. I nodded again, wanting to keep the story coming. We had just got out of high school, and if you can imagine, I knew Meemaw and Dan were about the same age. I tried to imagine them as high school kids, but the picture I came up with in my mind was kind of fuzzy and pretty funny. "So what happened?" I begged. "Well, it was graduation night," Meemaw began. "A group of us seniors got together to kick up our heels one last time before we all went off to get jobs or get married or whatever we had planned. We were picnicking and swimming up at the springs. It wasn't like it is now, all commercialized and crowded with so many people and tour boats and all. It was almost like our own little private swimming hole. Hardly anybody knew about it except us locals. There were some other older fellows there, and they'd built a campfire down the shore from us, and they were getting pretty rowdy. Well, it got late and pitch dark. I don't remember why, but I walked away from our group a little ways. Meemaw stopped to pour herself a cup of coffee, and I sat down on the stool by the counter, dying for her to continue. Then, out of nowhere it seemed, one of those older fellows showed up beside me, and I saw right off he'd had too much to drink. And Skeeter, he wasn't talking or acting like a gentleman. I told him to get away from me, but he wouldn't listen. I called for help, and the boys from our group came running over. I was so relieved, thinking that would be the end of it, and we'd all just go home. But that older fellow had a little axe hanging from his belt. He'd been using it to cut tree branches for the campfire. We all saw him. He took out that little axe and started swinging it around, and when he did that, all the boys backed off real quick. All except Dan, bless his heart. A little axe, I thought. She's talking about the hatchet. You could have knocked me over with the feathers on a tarpon fly. The mysterious blonde, the cause of the hatchet fight I'd imagined so often, was Meemaw. I could not believe it. Dan came to my rescue like a hero in a storybook, Meemaw went on. He got a horrible cut on his face, and when the fellow with the axe saw all that blood pouring down Dan's cheek and onto his shirt, well, he turned tail and ran like a rabbit. We took Dan to the hospital to get his face stitched up, and that was that. Meemaw took a sip of her coffee and said, "I'll always feel responsible for that scar, and I've loved Danny Houlihan ever since." Danny Houlihan? I laughed. I'd never heard him called anything but Dirty Dan. When I'd recovered enough to speak, I asked her, "But if you love him, how come you don't marry him?" Then I remembered something and added excitedly, "I saw him kiss you after the karaoke contest. I bet he loves you too." Meemaw had a good chuckle over that. "I believe he does, Skeet, in his way. But some men are the marrying kind, Skeeter, and some aren't, and I can tell you for a fact that Dan isn't. There's 4 women out there who used to be his wives who'd agree with that. I was young and foolish, but even then I had a hunch Dan would make a much better friend than husband." I hardly knew what to say. I was so flummoxed by the news. I loved the story of Dan's scar more than ever now, knowing he got it fighting for Mima. "You know something else, Pete?" Mima said a while later, as she was washing her coffee cup. "I believe your mamma and daddy might be better at being friends too, instead of being husband and wife." I thought about that for a bit. Somehow, the way Mima put it, it didn't sound so terrible. "Do you think you could live with that?" she asked. "I guess I might have to," I said. Mima smiled at me. Then she put her hands on her hips and raised her eyebrows. "Now, young man, we have something else we need to talk about." Uh-oh. I knew what was coming. "Aw, Mima, I'm real sorry I lied to you about going to Lenny's." "Apology accepted, but that's not what I was going to say." It wasn't. My mind scrambled to think of what else I'd done that was bad. "Your mamma and daddy are so distracted right now, neither of them thought to ask you why you didn't radio for Earl when he found the manatee, but I've been wondering." Before I could say anything, she went on, "And my guess is that your radio's broken and you didn't want to tell your mamma because it would cramp your style during your school break if you couldn't go out in your boat. Am I right?" Mima didn't miss much. I had to say that for her. "Yeah, it's the antenna," I confessed. "I only need $8 more and I can get a new one. Tell you what, I can't make heads or tails of the directions for setting up that karaoke machine. If you'll help me, I'll pay you $10. You promise me you won't go back out in that boat until the radio works, and the whole thing can be our little secret." "Deal," I said, and I gave her a hug. "Let's do it right now." I set up the amp, speakers, and microphone where Mima wanted it in the living room. Then I showed her how to load the discs with the background music and song lyrics into the player. She got pretty excited when she saw that the kit came with 5 different discs and that each one held 50 different songs. She especially liked the one that had country hits on it. "Why, Skeeter, you're a mechanical genius," she exclaimed when the music to a song called "Chattanooga Sugar Babe" began to play, and the words showed up on the screen. We fooled around with the karaoke machine for a while. We were doing a duet of a song called "Crazy," when Mom came home and said that's exactly what we were. Then she asked if I'd written my English paper yet, and told me I had about an hour to work on it before supper. I went to my room. I'd thrown my artistic trash collection off the bed the night before, and the objects lay scattered on the floor. I started to pick them up to put them in my backpack, and I remembered Mrs. Rathbun telling us that when we had our things gathered, we should take a real close look at them. "Look hard," she kept saying. "Try to really see each object and its relation to the others. Look over, under, around, and through." I tried it. At first I just saw the same pile of junk. But after staring at that stuff for a while, I began to see the different angles and textures. I began rearranging the objects, and I saw how each thing changed depending on where it was in the big picture that included all the others. It was kind of cool, really, and I thought trying to paint them might be fun. The paper was due the next day. I had to get that started. But I couldn't write about the manatee, as Mima had suggested. I wasn't peeved anymore, for one thing. And the other thing was, I didn't want to. As Dan had said the day I caught my tarpon, some things just ought to stay secret. A weird little idea had been in the back of my mind ever since Mima and I went to the Golden Moon, and I decided to write about it. I finished the first draft right before Mom called me to dinner. Afterwards, I asked if I could ride my bike over to the marina. Mima winked at me. I guessed she knew why I was going. Larry didn't have the antenna I needed in stock, but he said he could get it in 2 days. Halfway home, I saw Earl driving toward me. He pulled over next to me in his police car and stopped, and suddenly I felt scared. What if the police had finally decided to do an investigation? Now that I'd made such a big thing out of the manatee, how could I get Earl to back off without betraying Dan? Luckily, Earl spoke first. "Dan came to see me a while ago," he said quietly. "He told me what happened to the manatee. I guess he told you too." "Yeah," I said. Then quickly I asked, "What happens now? You're not going to do anything, are you?" I mean, to Dan or to Blink?" Earl gazed out at an inflatable raft with a bunch of kids in it passing on the river. "Police officers have a certain amount of discretion when it comes to enforcing the law, Skeet," he said slowly. "Do you know what that means?" I shook my head. "Not really." "Well, it means that sometimes I need to look not just at the crime, but at all the circumstances around the crime. And then I have to decide what course of action best serves the people. I'm supposed to be protected." He paused and added, "All afternoon I've been asking myself, what good would it do to follow the letter of the law in this case?" I thought I knew what he was getting at, but I needed to know for sure. "So what did you decide?" I asked. "I think by now the vultures have pretty much taken care of the body, and what's left will soon sink down into the muck and disappear. And that's where it'll stay. That's what I think." I nodded and smiled. "Case closed?" he asked.